My name is Barta. I serve on the board of directors for ITSAN, the International Topical Steroid Awareness Network, and also as the president of the National Coalition of Skin Diseases. It's been a little over 11 years. I started TSW in 2012, first week of June. I've been advocating for the TSW community since about 2016 when I joined the board of directors for ITSAN. It's taken up a lot of my time. It's taken up a lot of my energy, a lot of emotional energy, I would say, just because it's such a sense of urgency that I feel to help this community. So many people are suffering and there's such a great need. We've faced a lot of hurdles in the space of dermatology, with dermatologists in particular. It's been very difficult to be heard with this message. There's a lot of resistance. In fact, I personally, on a level just with my own dermatologist, have been dismissed and not believed. And then in my work with ITSAN, many of the conversations that I have had have been the same. Where it's just written off as steroidphobia, or many times the conversation is redirected into, it's not okay for patients to suffer, instead of talking about the issue of topical steroid and addressing it. As an example, a meeting that I had not too long ago where we were all on a Zoom together, and it was a focus meeting on atopic dermatitis. When the issue of topical steroid was brought up, that chair of the meeting actually turned away from the screen and started working to the side and completely disengaged from the conversation. So many times then others, especially younger doctors, will also disengage because they follow the lead of those that they respect. Unfortunately, we've all also faced hurdles with the TSW community, where a lot of times, because people are hurting so much, they're so sensitive, there's a lot of inflammatory reactions to things. A lot of people feel very strongly about the treatments that they're using, or if someone challenges those treatments, it's taken very personally. And so many times, because of the sensitivity, there can be a lot of infighting in our groups. A lot of times it can be people's perceptions or assumptions, especially at ITSAN, that we may not be doing what they think is the correct thing to do in the situation, or the correct position or stance, especially working with some of the stakeholders that are critical to solve this problem. It's been a really hard road to walk as an organization, because we want to do what's best for the people experiencing TSW, right? And the general public. That is the group that we support entirely, and that's who we are a voice for. When I first was leading ITSAN, we thought about doing a general awareness campaign. So that would be anybody who could be touched by eczema. And we thought of doing billboards and geofencing and things like that, just to get the message out. But then after our conversations with doctors and realizing there isn't enough familiarity around this condition, there isn't acceptance or acknowledgement. So raising awareness in the general public may not actually be the best step. Really what we needed to do was reach the medical community with a message, get them working on the issue, get them, understanding how to diagnose it, how to prevent it, how to treat it, before we raise the alarm in the general public. However, I will say, because of social media now, it's spreading like wildfire. And patients are talking to each other. People are starting to connect the dots. So really awareness now has been to try to get to those decision makers who can actually really move the needle forward. And we've identified that as those in basic science and research, because we have to have the evidence in order to change general practice around standard of care and to make change with our regulating bodies like the FDA. We have to have the evidence. So that's what our thrust has been this past year, is really bringing this message to groups like the NIH and others. Our meeting with the FDA was frustrating. I mean, I was really happy that they have these opportunities for patients to engage and to let them know what their concerns are around certain disease states. They're called patient listening sessions. And it took some maneuvering, but we finally made the connection in order to set a meeting up with the FDA. I will say, once we started that conversation and connected to the right person, it took 6 months of meeting with this liaison before we got an actual meeting with the FDA. And it's frustrating that, number one, it takes so long, because when there's something as urgent as TSW, everything just feels like it's a year out. And we have that conversation, and now our next step is another year out. That's not okay. So before going into that meeting with the FDA, I had watched the docuseries Dope Sick about the opioid crisis. And I'm glad that I did, because it mentally prepared me for the response that we got from the FDA, which was very similar, and that they told us, this is not our problem. This is about the practice of medicine, and you need to go and educate healthcare professionals, which doesn't really go over well. Healthcare professionals are not educated by patient groups typically. This comes through different avenues. So that was really frustrating to hear from the FDA. And I will say, in that meeting, we asked not only for product label changes, which would include a warning that topical steroid withdrawal syndrome does exist and there is a risk of that, but we also wanted them to just put just a plain label of steroid on the product, so patients actually understand that they're using a steroid. Many people are not aware of that. So we asked for that. We also asked for a public health advisory going out to healthcare professionals and the general public alike, and for a drug safety hearing. We had our initial conversations with the FDA in September 2021. We did a follow-up in December. They told us we would hear by the next quarter, and it's been over a year and a half. We still have not heard back from the FDA. Even though, and I will add, we told the FDA MHRA had published a 26-page report on topical steroid withdrawal in September of 2021. So as we were meeting them, we told them, listen, so much of the work has already been done. You can take a look internally at these documents, but still we have yet to hear a word. And lastly, I'll add, and this is just a bone that I have to pick personally, before our follow-up meeting, I was reading a guidance document that was on the FDA's website. It was written in 2007, and it was talking about their commitment to the general public to communicate any drug safety information, even that which was emerging, and also that they were the primary source for drug safety information for healthcare providers. So I was cutting, pasting, highlighting all of this verbiage to prepare myself for the conversation with the deputy director. And then when they started going around in circles and not taking responsibility for the issue, basically saying this is the practice of medicine, I pulled up that document and started reading verbatim what was on their own website. Later, I went to cite that document in my book. It was 3 weeks later, they had pulled it off of their website, which was shocking to me, because the FDA was set up for public safety. That is their whole job description. And when we asked them, what is the threshold for reporting before you'll take action, they told us there really isn't a threshold, that they know about this, but doctors just are not talking to patients. To which we replied, we know that doctors don't know. We've talked to many of them. That information is not out there. So we don't know where the disconnect is, but there truly is a disconnect. Doctors don't know about this, and patients are bearing the consequence of that. Another documentary called The Pharmacist, where the DEA was talking to the FDA about pulling OxyContin. It was actually, I believe, the director of the DEA was being interviewed, and she was saying something to the effect that nobody questions the doctor's orders because it's seen as holy, which is another challenge and another hurdle, is because nobody is questioning this caveat that's on these drug labels, which is use, only for 2 weeks or as directed by your doctor. So if your doctor is prescribing that for you, that's, totally fine. Nobody questions it. And there's so much trust for physicians. I remember seeing something about different levels of trust in all of these different areas of life. So law enforcement, doctors, politicians, lawyers, pastors. Doctors were at the very top of the list. So patients trust their doctors many times implicitly. So when they don't have the information and they're actually treating patients with a drug that we really don't have the evidence behind to treat that way, we say that we're evidence-based, but nobody's been really tracking what happens with these drugs over 20, 30, 40, 50, 70 years when patients are using for long periods of time. The clinical trials for topical steroids, many of them were 3 to 4 weeks long. That's the phase 3 clinical trials. And yet they've been on the market for decades with no real oversight. So this is a problem. This is a drug that doesn't have a max dose and a max time frame. And what drug has that? It's difficult to have labels changed because you have to go back and do clinical trials again. And when we spoke with the FDA, they told us, we know that all drugs have side effects. And by putting people back into clinical trials, we know we expose them to risk, which is crazy to me because I think it's not okay and it's not ethical to go back into clinical trials to figure out what's actually happening. But it is okay to have these drugs on the market for 70 years and turn a blind eye, or have a reporting system that doesn't really matter what the threshold for reporting is. It's important to have the label changed because not only will this help guide doctors prescribing the drug, especially if you put a black box label on something, that gives people pause. That gives doctors pause about, prescribing it and keeping more of an eye on it, but it also gives patients pause. It makes them realize, hey, there are real risks around using this drug. So putting just the name steroid on a label, just like we have these blanket warnings on alcohol, let's say, for if you're pregnant, or on cigarettes, patients should be aware of the risks of the drugs that they're using. They should know what they're using. And not only should they know that it is a steroid, but they should know if there are risks involved, like topical steroid withdrawal syndrome. So many patients, they go to their doctors and they talk about it, but because it's not on the label, the doctors feel like it doesn't exist. So patients have no leg to stand on. Most topical steroids do not have a max dose. They definitely don't have a max time frame. It's very confusing for patients because if you look on most of the labels, they say don't use for more than 2 to 3 weeks, but they're prescribed from years to decades. I remember having a conversation with my pharmacist about this and saying, well, I don't really get this. It says don't use for more than 2 or 3 weeks. Why is it okay for me to use for 26 years? And they say, well, that's something you have to talk to your doctor about. And I feel in this whole thing is everybody's pointing the finger at somebody else. And what I finally interpreted that as was do not use more than 2 or 3 weeks on one spot. Because as a patient, all I was told was there was a risk for thinning the skin if you use too long. So I figured, well, as long as I'm not using it a lot or on the same spot for a long period of time, I should be perfectly fine. If my doctor is willing to prescribe it for me, it must be okay. Another conversation I had with my doctor that is extremely frustrating to me was when I was pregnant with my second child. My eczema was spreading and getting worse, and I was at that time on a high potency steroid. And so I was using it just to try to control and manage my skin, but I was concerned. And so I asked my doctor about that. Is it okay that I'm taking this high potency steroid and using it on more of my body? And he said, well, you just have to weigh the risk with the benefit. And later on, when I did the research myself, I realized Nobody knows the risk. There have been no studies around pregnancy. So it's extremely misleading to tell a patient something like that when in my mind I'm thinking, well, if you're willing to prescribe it to me, it must be safe. I'm trusting you as my doctor to help me make that decision. And because many of us, we feel like, they have been educated, they have the experience, it's something that I don't have to think about. I shouldn't have to spend a lot of time researching on my own. That's your job. That's what I'm paying you for. But yet, I find out that that was an extremely misleading non-answer. And yet again, I was the one left holding the bag, right? We as patients then were accused of misusing or overusing when we really are using according to our doctor's direction. So as we were looking to present to the FDA on the whole topic of no max dose, no max time frame, we also looked at body surface area because there are lots of different factors in the steroids that you're using. Number one, you should be thinking about the potency you're using, and most people don't even know what potency they're using because it's not listed on the drug itself. So there are different classes of steroids from very, very low potency, which is the over-the-counter hydrocortisone that you could get at any grocery store, all the way up to the super potent steroids. Most people don't understand the strength of these drugs. And so if you're prescribed, especially young children, and I have heard stories of this, infants several months old are prescribed a high potency steroid to blast the inflammation. But the problem with eczema is it's chronic, so it's going to come back. And so parents continue to use this drug, not just for a flare, but to manage the eczema, which is not wise because kids' skin is more permeable, so they're going to absorb more of it into their system, and it's going to cause more damage. The other piece is the body surface area, or BSA. We were only able to find one label that talked about that, which was Elicon cream, and it said don't use more than 20% of the body surface area because you could see side effects like HPA axis suppression, growth retardation, issues with heart. And when we did a survey with the Allergy and Asthma Network and ITSAN, did a joint survey that was pushed out internationally, we saw on an average adults and children were using on more body surface area than 20% across the board. So patients aren't really trained on what that means. Most people have never even heard of body surface area. They're told to use as directed on affected areas. So wherever your eczema is where you're going to use that cream, but nobody's paying attention to percentages. And the trouble is with topical steroid dependence is that many times it's driving that steroid to start spreading to other areas of the body, and so you're using on more and more and more surface area over time, which means you're absorbing more of it into your system. It's also really important on where you're using topical steroids because there are certain areas of your body that are going to absorb more of the drug, such as your face, underarms, genitals. Your hands are thicker, so they wouldn't absorb as much, but a lot of people aren't paying attention to that either, or just feel like these drugs are so safe, it doesn't matter, big deal. Like these thresholds or these recommendations are just nice to have, but they really do mean something. Whenever there's a threshold for a drug or a dosage, it means over that dose is where we see that the risk outweighs the benefit. It means that we've seen bad results, and if you use more than the dose, you could really, truly experience these negative side effects. So there's a reason why there's a dose. And it's scary when topical steroids have no dose. That patients feel like they're that safe and doctors feel like they're that safe that they can be used indefinitely, even as lotion sometimes. I'll say my personal belief as to why doctors feel like it's okay to prescribe indefinitely is just because they truly believe that these drugs are very safe. And the literature that we have and the studies that have been done state that. And so that's what they're taught in university. That's what's in the textbooks. That's just what they have known and believed for this time. The problem is people really aren't paying that much attention. There really aren't these post-market studies to really look into side effects like topical steroid withdrawal. So it really isn't evidence-based. A big question that many of us wonder is why, when so many drugs have these known side effects, why is it so hard to accept that topical steroids could actually be causing this syndrome? We know with antibiotics, so many of them have potential for a bad reaction. And when you talk to your doctor about it, they completely agree with you. Let's never use that drug again. But for some reason with topical steroids, it's just the medical community has a really hard time believing that it's causing this effect. I think part of the problem is because some of the symptoms could look like eczema if they aren't aware of this condition and they're not familiar with seeing this cluster of symptoms together. So I know that many of the patients, when they see their doctors, this is just seen as and diagnosed as worsening eczema. And, you know, when you're coming off the drug, they feel like you're just getting down to your baseline eczema, which has worsened over time, instead of seeing it as a distinct condition. It's possible to find out certain information such as how many have reported to the FDA errors system by filing a Freedom of Information request. We have not done that as of today, but it's something that would be worth doing just to help push this forward with the FDA. If we can prove that so many have reported, I think some of the trouble around that is there's certain language that people will use. It's not one symptom. It's not one drug. So it makes it a little bit more difficult to find when you're looking at a whole class of drugs and people using multiple steroids over time, as well as a variety of different symptoms. In 2021, Allergy and Asthma Network and ITSAN worked on a joint survey that we pushed out internationally. We had over 2,100 responses to that, and it was looking at steroid exposure and cumulative effect in AD patients or atopic dermatitis patients. So the average time that we saw patients using this drug, adults, was 15.3 years. And when we asked them how many days out of the month, how many times a day, the typical was 15 days out of a month, 2 times a day, which that's a lot. Another concern that we saw in this survey was the use of oral steroids. 36% of respondents had also used oral steroids to manage their eczema on top of using topical steroids. And when we asked them how many rounds, the average was 8 rounds for adults. When we worked with Allergy and Asthma Network on an oral corticosteroid stewardship campaign, it was determined that 1 gram of prednisone, so oral steroids, was a threshold before you would see side effects like osteoporosis and diabetes down the line. And this was taken from claims data from insurance companies. And it's also talked about in a publication by David Price in 2017. So when we think about the fact that 1 gram would be 4 rounds of steroids, people have already taken double that, plus they're using these topicals for decades. And then think about nasal sprays for allergies that many times have steroids and people don't know, or eye drops, ear drops, inhaled for asthma, because half of eczema patients are also asthma patients and allergy patients. So people are being exposed to so much, especially here in the US where there's not coordinated care. So many times patients can be getting steroids from their allergist, their dermatologist, their pediatrician. They can be getting them over the counter. I didn't know for the longest time that hydrocortisone cream was a steroid. I had no idea. But many times people will start using something like this, it stops working, and now they need, to get a prescription steroid. And then it continues to go on. I need to up the ante to continue to clear my skin, which we all know is a telltale sign of dependence. In the survey that we ran, we really looked at a patient's whole eczema journey. We asked when they were diagnosed, where eczema was on their body, and we used a validated tool to do that so we could calculate the body surface area percentage. And then we asked where they used the steroids. We asked what happened over time. Did they continue to use? Did they develop any new or worsening symptoms? Did they come off steroids? What happened when they came off steroids? What did those symptoms look like? One of the really surprising things that we saw were the new and worsening conditions that people experienced. And we looked at if one steroid was used or if two or more were used. We also looked at the duration of that use. And depending on how many steroids were used and how long they were used, those worsening symptoms and new conditions continued to go up. So things like allergies, depression, anxiety, even cardiovascular issues. There were quite a few different conditions that we saw. And then when we looked at, why did you stop using topical steroids? It was really surprising to see how many stopped because they just stopped working. Or if they were experiencing side effects. It was only, I believe, 14% stopped because they didn't need them anymore, because their condition was getting better. I'm really happy to say that there's been a growing interest in this past year around topical steroid withdrawal, and I believe part of that has to do with how much buzz there is on social media, and people are just coming into contact with it, and they have questions and they're wondering, and so they're searching it and looking into it. And I think that the medical community is realizing we can't continue to ignore this because it's becoming a real concern, and they're having a lot of patients come to them. So because of that, that has opened doors for people who want to start looking into research and being committed to doing the research and funding the research. I would say that's probably what's really been pushing it forward, is just the continued conversation and persistence around this issue, and it is not going away. So doors, I would say, in basic science to look at the underpinnings of this disease and finding out actually what is causing some people to develop topical steroid withdrawal syndrome, and then looking at it at a molecular level to see how does this differentiate than atopic dermatitis, because clearly it's something different, but until we can prove it, we can't really change standard of care, right? So we also are seeing doors open for and this is just recent, but I had a conversation with someone at the World Health Organization about providing education around topical steroid withdrawal syndrome and really how it is driving a lot of really bad, hard to control infectious diseases. And if you can imagine, around the world, these are such cheap drugs to use, and they're such a quick fix. They're used for nearly all skin conditions. But when you use them on a regular basis, you're really compromising the immunity in your skin. So what used to be a small case of ringworm is now a full body fungal infection that's very, very difficult to treat. So World Health Organization has shown interest in this and to providing education around this issue. When you think of antimicrobial resistance and what a big problem that is now because of the overuse of antibiotics, it's one of the top 10 health threats stated by the World Health Organization, that if we don't get control of it, if we don't find solutions, by 2040, more people will be dying of infections than cancer. So we see this similar, like a similar problem with topical steroids. They're being overused and they're creating more problems. I see one of the most important doors to open, or that needs to be opened, it is still a challenge, is really providing education for healthcare providers. Our doctors, especially general practice and pediatricians, need to be aware of this condition so they know how to prevent it, number one, how to see signs of it, diagnose it, and then what to do to treat. So 2/3 of skin patients see their general practitioner and they never even see a dermatologist. So it's so important that across the board, healthcare providers are aware of this condition and are on the lookout for it, and really using these drugs more judiciously so it never happens in the first place. The community could help raise awareness in so many different ways. In the simplest ways, it would be talking to your friends and family about this, telling them about your experience, because really as they watch you and they watch you heal, they watch the whole process, the proof is in the pudding. So talking to your friends and family is the easiest thing that you can do. You can talk about it on social media. You can go back to your doctor and talk to your doctor about it and let him watch the process of you healing. Because if patients just run away and never see their doctors again, many times the doctor could think, oh, they're better. You know, they're never aware of the situation. It took me 9 years to go back to my doctor and tell him, and it was extremely hard to do so because I felt dismissed and really felt like, you know, you are someone who ruined my life inadvertently, but still ruined my life. That was very hard to go back. But unless we do that as patients, we can't move this forward. So that's another way. You can talk to your local hospitals. We have someone in England who was working with their hospital to develop a pamphlet that every person who is prescribed a steroid has to be given, and it has warnings of topical steroid withdrawal. So there are so many things that you can do. You can talk to your legislators on a local level, on a state level. That is not hard to do. It feels scary if you've never done it, but you can talk to them. You can ask them, will you please sign this TSW awareness resolution that ITSAN has been, you know, putting together and putting forward and has drafted. So in your state, that could be something that could be, you know, filed, that parents, especially who are faced with child protective services or patients who are being dismissed by their doctors, they can bring this piece and this document to them and say, listen, this is an acknowledged condition. We need more research, but at least they have something to stand on. One of the biggest issues that has held the TSW community back from really making the kind of impact that they could would be the divisiveness and the infighting with people being very staunch about what they believe is either the cause or the treatment. I would say treatment even more so. And what's been effective for them, people kind of get entrenched in that and they feel threatened and get extremely defensive if that's challenged by someone else. Because we don't really understand this condition, there really is no silver bullet that works for everyone. And so, you know, if there was a way that our community could come together as one and realize, listen, we have a lot of stuff to figure out. And, you know, what works for you, that's great. It may not work for me, but not taking it personally and not being inflammatory and fighting back. We really need unity in order to move this message forward. If medical professionals would take the time to listen to this message and really take seriously what patients were bringing forward, even if it was threatening, even if it was against what was the status quo, even if it was something that they'd never heard of before, we know that medicine is an evolving science, especially with the addition of pharmaceuticals. If doctors would take the time to listen to patients, if we took the time to understand and respect one another, it takes both sides to solve this problem. It takes the patients being empowered and being able to really speak about what they're experiencing and their frustrations, the vulnerability. It takes the doctor respecting their own patient as a human being equal to themselves. Even if they don't have the education or the experience, a human being equal to themselves, who they are there to serve, to care for, to help improve their quality of life. Up to this point, it's been really difficult to move forward in a large part due to lack of resources. People don't want to give into something where there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Unless you've been personally affected by it, a lot of people just don't want to put their money where they don't know if that's actually going to bring a good, positive result. If medical professionals are not supporting patients, why would family members, right? Because we all implicitly trust our doctors. So a lot of times, well, really, up until this point, we have relied on our members to help fund the mission. But many times when you're in TSW, there's all the uncertainty about, like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to work again, right? So, you know, people are reticent to give. ITSAN has not wanted to go after money from pharma, even though that would be very probably easy money. There's a lot of money there, and there would be incentive for some of these innovative drugs that are steroid sparing. There would be some incentive there to help them prove the message of, you know, these side effects from steroids. But the minute that we do that as ITSAN, we lose credibility with our members who have been hurt by a pharmaceutical, and so they're hypersensitive to any pharmaceuticals, whether that be good or bad. Because trust is such a valuable commodity, because this population has so little that they know they can believe in and have a trusted source for information and guidance, ITSAN has had to walk this line where we have said no to that so that we can retain that trust. Because a lot of these people have come out from medical oversight, which is not a smart thing to do when you're within a very severe debilitating condition. And so we feel because such a great need resides there, we had to be very careful about where we find our funding. Even in recommending products, because our skin is so sensitive, what again will work for one could really harm another. So funding has been difficult, and we really have waited until we can get some principal investigators or researchers who are interested enough to help go after some of these larger grants. And that's coming, but it has taken a lot of time to build up that interest with these parties. We have found as ITSAN that other specialties have been much more open to this message than dermatology. Allergy and immunology has been much more receptive and has been willing to work with us. And even in the publication of our survey results, it was in the Annals of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology, not the dermatology journals, which all rejected it. Unfortunately, it's because it's still such a controversial issue. I see this cause as water, that we're going to hit a lot of obstacles, and we have lots of obstacles, but we will find a way around. And it does seem like we get in a lot through back doors in ways that we never would have expected. Steroid phobia, I think, is one of the biggest sore spots in our community. It's adding insult to injury. Clearly, we were not steroid phobic when we used steroids for 26 years without a care, because we completely trusted that they were safe and effective and fine to use indefinitely. We were not steroid phobic. And to go back to a doctor and be told that is extremely insulting, and it does not land well with patients. There are studies around steroid phobia. It's a buzzword you hear everywhere, and it's something that's constantly, the conversation is redirected with healthcare providers into that lane of, it's going to cause steroid phobia. If we talk about topical steroid withdrawal syndrome, you're just going to reiterate that, and patients aren't going to use the medicine that's going to make them better. ITSAN is not against steroids. We understand that they can be useful and life-saving, but they need to be understood and properly prescribed and used. And it's not okay to give patients information that will mislead them. That is not okay. We have the right to informed consent. So the steroid phobic topic, I hope, will die in time. I don't know any other drug that's on the market that has the word phobia attached to it. To me, I feel like, this is not irrational behavior. If you put your hand on a hot stove and it gets burned, it's not irrational to not want to touch a hot stove again. I think of, using a toothpaste. If it was making my gums blister, but my dentist told me to keep on using it and keep on using it and keep on using it, it would be irrational to continue that path. Sharing my TSW story was extremely difficult to do. And I remember the day it came out publicly, I sat on the couch with my sister and cried. I did not want the world to know me this way. It was the last thing in the world I wanted. All my life I had hid my skin. I had lived in spite of. It wasn't something I talked about. It wasn't something I let into my everyday life in relationships. But now, as I've shared it, it's one of the most rewarding things for me, because it offers people hope for unspeakable suffering. It's worth it. Eczema herpeticum is a form of the herpes simplex virus. It happens when you're exposed to herpes and you have atopic dermatitis. It's potentially very dangerous and is life-threatening in certain cases and should be taken very seriously. My experience with eczema herpeticum was the darkest, one of the darkest times in my life. Definitely the most painful. It came on very suddenly. I had no idea what was happening. We were on vacation and I would just started not feeling well. I had a couple of bumps on the back of my leg, but I was very used to, in TSW, strange things happening on my skin, so I just was monitoring it. But these bumps grew. I was feeling worse. And then I looked and they had black centers, which was pretty disconcerting. I then started to get all these bumps on my arm. And I was feeling like something was wrong inside. I don't know how you describe that. I could just tell something was wrong. And I booked an appointment with my dermatologist. I went in, they did a biopsy on my arm, and she told me, I want you to go straight to the emergency room. Don't even go home. You're very sick. And by the time I walked out of her office, I almost passed out. I did go home so I could get my husband and we could go to the emergency room. But when we checked in, they admitted me and they didn't really know what was going on. And it was moving so fast. It was pretty scary. And within several days, I was covered head to toe with eczema herpeticum. It was much more painful than anything I had experienced with TSW. It's in the nerve endings. I couldn't even move. I had to be taken out of bed by locking fingertips with my nurse to pull me out to use the bathroom. I couldn't even put words together in a sentence. It was that painful. The treatment that I had gotten in my Atlanta hospital, a large hospital, was unreal. It was the first time I ever filed a formal complaint because of what I experienced there. On top of the horrific disease was the care that I had received. I can't tell you how frightening it was to be completely at the mercy of inadequate care and to be alone at that time. And when I finally, my family asked for a discharge from that hospital because of the care I was receiving, they did not want to grant that to me. And it wasn't until we gave them the laundry list of the negligent acts that had been done that they did finally let me go and say, well, if you run into trouble, go to this other area hospital. And it took me weeks at home before I even let my children see me. I looked like someone from The Walking Dead, literally. Like the lesions on me were like oozing this black liquid, and it was, you couldn't even see that it was me. I looked like something from a medical journal. And after I went through that, I honestly at the time couldn't believe that God would allow something like that to happen to me. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that on top of being sick, that kind of care, my marriage started going into a tailspin at the time. I just went into a really dark place. All I wanted to do, after fighting for 4 years through TSW and finally getting to a pretty good place and then having something like this happen, I wanted to crawl in a cave and die. I didn't have the will to fight anymore. But I will say it was the catalyst that it was a conversation with my sister, which I go into in my book, but it lit a fire in me. It really stoked these dying coals. And this fire started to take over, burn through the inhibitions, the intimidation, all of the fear, my introverted nature of, I'm too scared to talk to people with roles and titles and all of that, burned through it all. And I got to a place where I was really afraid. The antivirals I was using would no longer work because the virus was recurring every 3 weeks. My body just was having a hard time fighting it. I was so scared of just developing a resistance and then having that virus take my life because I couldn't imagine a worse way to die. But I thought, that could happen, or these medications could work. They could get me through this season and I could be okay. Regardless of what happens, I am fighting this until my last breath, until this is fixed. This has to stop. People need to know this is not okay, that this is happening to thousands of people, and we will fight until it's finished. Currently, we're working with the NIH on a TSW pilot study that I'm super excited about, because if anything can be identified as being different than atopic dermatitis, we can crack open the door for TSW research, which is going to take a lot of time and a lot of money. So we're thrilled that Dr. Ian Miles has picked this up and believed in this community enough to push this study forward. I'm so proud of the people who have stepped forward in order to participate. It's not an easy thing to trust a system that has harmed you, but to say, yes, I want to get involved in the process. I want to help others behind myself get answers, get treatments, and get the care that they need. I am stronger, more authentic, more compassionate, more present because of TSW.